Welcome to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast, where in every episode we explore what is research culture and what should it be. You'll hear thoughts and opinions from a range of contributors to help you change research culture into what you want it to be.
Hello and welcome to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast. My name is Nick Shepherd and I'm Open Research Advisor based in the library here at the University of Leeds. Now, most of the podcasts I've recorded, I've done so remotely, speaking to my guest on a laptop screen, so I'm very pleased to be sat just across the table from today's guest, Dr. Eike Rinke. So welcome to the podcast, Eike, and thanks for taking the time to speak to me.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks for welcoming me here.
So we've liaised and worked together now for several years and in the context of open research, mostly in the context of your role actually as the local network lead for the UK Reproducibility Network, or UKRN. I'm sure we'll talk about that more as we go. But it occurred to me actually that I know relatively little about what you might call your day job. So you're a lecturer, I think, in the School of Politics and International Studies, is that right?
That's correct. I'm a lecturer in politics and media in Polis, the politics department. But I work at the intersection of politics and media and communication studies, really. Okay,
well, then again, we can get, I think, into your academic context and how that relates to open research as we go. But like as I say, we have relayed a lot in the context of open research and that role you have as local network lead that we'll talk about. And in 2024, I even accepted a Research Culture Award on your behalf in the open research category. You weren't
That's very true.
Perhaps you weren't in the country at the time. I can't recall quite.
Yeah, I was traveling for a conference at the time. Yeah.
So where do you keep that award? It was quite a substantial trophy, as I recall, a bit of glass trophy, wasn't it?
It's as a wooden trophy.
Was it wooden?
Yeah.
I'm misremembering.
You got your materials wrong. No, it's wooden trophy that hopefully is stored safely in my office in the Social Sciences building, where I can't access it right now because that's under renovation.
So you actually separated from your award at the moment.
Sadly, yes.
So, as I say, we'll obviously be talking today a lot about open research and the UK Reproducibility Network, but perhaps give us a little bit of a précis, an overview of your academic background as a lecturer in politics and media, did you say, in the School of Politics? And how that did that contribute to your interest in open research?
Yeah, so my background, in fact, is not in political science per se, but in media and communication studies, which is the field I acquired my PhD in. However, I've always worked at the intersection of politics and media and communication. So my PhD was in political communication, which is that sort of intersection overlapping field that covers both disciplines essentially, and it was only in my postdoc that I transitioned over into political science. Sort of did a postdoc in a big political science institute back in Germany, where I did my PhD as well, and sort of stayed with one foot perhaps more firmly rooted in political science than communication, but they still are sort of straddling those two fields to this day. So my work is in journalism and media systems, as well as in what's called deliberation research. So inquiry about how people talk to each other politically, how society talks with itself about political matters, public affairs, from the micro level of individual conversations, just like the one that we're having here right now, where it's two people in the same room chatting with each other, all the way to the societal level of sort of institutions communicating around matters of public interest. And those institutions most notably, of course, include sort of political institutions, but also journalism, right, which is sort of can be thought of as an infrastructure of addressing sort of topics of general concern that are sort of current interest. Yeah.
Of which there are many, I guess, in today's world.
Well, there always are. They certainly don't seem to be coming any less.
But that's perhaps a different podcast, isn't it? Perhaps can't go into too much detail around some of the.
Yeah,
although
right.
I'm sure that'd be a fascinating conversation as well. But in the context, so you're a social scientist.
Yes. So I think that's the most accurate and sort of label to put on me really is, and on my work, substantive work, is that I'm a social scientist at heart. Yeah.
Because this is an interesting conversation, I think, that I've had with you before and other colleagues around the disciplinary context for open research. And perhaps it comes largely from the social sciences, from psychology. And one of my challenges in my role is sort of applying open research to different fields. But so your sort of heritage, if you like, with open science and open research go back quite a long way to when you were doing your PhD, perhaps, or
Not quite that far away, but back. But I think it first started during my postdoc. But it was certainly inspired by experiences I had made along the way until that point, which when I first learned about early developments in open science, in my field, anyways, made me feel very intrigued from the very start about the idea of a movement trying to remedy what I think was quite clearly a widespread set of issues with the way we were doing our research. So that sort of absolutely has its roots in my academic socialization, starting from even before the PhD, I suppose, doing my sort of bachelor's and master's, but certainly really just sort of coalesced into this interest into open science in the postdoc phase, and so around 2016, so around 10 years ago, I think.
Could you about the time of Brexit, actually? Sorry to bring it back to the other political.
It was a bad year in general, but perhaps not personally.
It just occurred to me that
in that regard,
in the context of your your day job, but.
True.
It's an issue. So what are perhaps some of those issues that, as they apply to the social sciences, perhaps more generally and specifically in your area, that means that open research and open science is important?
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's important to recognize, as always, that the social sciences is an incredibly broad tent, and there's a lot of different activities, research activities happening within that tent that will imply different ways in which open science questions will be taken up and be sort of inflected from an individual researcher's point of view. So much of the work that happens within that tent of the social sciences doesn't really connect very well to the kind of work that I do. So epistemologically, even ontologically, I think there's such a variety and diversity in the social sciences, which is great, of course, such that it's difficult for me to speak for the social sciences as such, and also much more difficult even for me to try to impose my own experience from my own substantive work onto the social sciences as a whole. That's just impossible. However, having said that, I think the issues that are concerning people interested in open research and open science are of such general nature that, in principle, they apply, in my view anyways, to any research that is done within the broad tent of the social sciences and even beyond that. Every researcher should ask, in my view, the fundamental questions around just how open and am I, in the sense of how transparent am I being towards others about the work that I do, also towards myself about the work that I do. That's an important part of being open research, is openness towards oneself, honesty, you could say, towards oneself. What Richard Feynman, I think, called sort of radical honesty about the work that we do. And also in the sense of just how inclusive am I being, just how much do I let others into the world of my research, and others, including, of course, my peers as a researcher, but also the wider public. So including sort of stakeholders, sort of obvious stakeholders, policymakers, and so on, but also the general public. Those are questions that I think every researcher, no matter what their epistemology, their ontological point of view, etc., should ask themselves. So I think open research really is universal in that quite basic way. And of course, I could talk a little bit more about specifically the work that I do and how open research relates to that, how it's useful and important and should be translated from where I sit in the big tent of social sciences. I don't know.
I'm interested perhaps to pick up on a particular paper of yours, which I confess I haven't read in any detail, but I have seen you speak about your. Is it observing many researchers using the same data and hypothesis reveals a hidden universe of uncertainty? That's the title, I think, and I will post a link to that in the show notes for this when it goes out, because I think it's a fascinating area, and I've seen you talk about it several times, and it's quite frightening, really, I suppose, in the context of that's what I got from it in terms of how you can get quite different results depending on how you perform, what analyses you choose. I mean, again, I'm a layperson, really, but if you could tell us a little bit about that. I mean, that
yes.
relates to open research, and this is sort of meta science, is it?
Yes, that's one important branch, I would say, of the broader open science movement, which is the diagnostic, what I would call the diagnostic branch of open science, is meta researcher, in which we try to find out, to have an honest look at ourselves, at the ways of work that we engage in as academics, in order to identify the problems clearly, as clearly as possible, right? Because being conscious of the problems that might harm the credibility of the work that we do is an obvious first step and prerequisite to even the possibility of coming up with solutions and doing better, right, and improving our work. So that's meta research, and that's the diagnostic branch of open science, which this study absolutely belongs to.
Yeah.
Right? The other branch, just to be complete, there is the remedy branch, or the treatment. I would say that you could then think up in response to clearly identified problems. Right, where you develop new practices like pre-registration, for example, registered report, and so on, in order to make things better. But it's helpful, I think, to distinguish these two kinds of activities under the umbrella of open science. And yes, this study falls into the meta research diagnostic branch. And what we did there, just briefly put, is to do what's called a one data set, many analysts a study, where we crowdsourced or recruited a bunch of fellow academics, teams of academics as well around the world, who were interested, obviously, in the question that we were posing, which is all about the robustness of analytical pipelines in social science. So there's a predecessor study to this, which had come out at the time already, which was quite influential and still is, as well, by a guy called Silbertsan and colleagues, in which they did pretty much the same thing and found out that if they gave a data set to a bunch of different researchers and asked them from that data set to sort of answer a given research question, the answers they would get were quite diverse and different, depending on who ran the analysis. So what we did was something similar in a more applied, more realistic, you could say, ecologically valid, perhaps, a way, with an actual research hypothesis that had been studied and published on previously, using a data set that also is frequently used in the social sciences.
So you're trying to reproduce it in a way?
Yeah, so there's a reproduction part to it, but then the more interesting part really was the reproduction of a previously published study. But the more interesting part was the one where we let our research teams off the leash, if you will, and told them to just do whatever they wanted to do, rather than just reproduce the original study, in order to answer the research question, which remained the same, as best as they could, given the data set. And that's when where the interesting findings arose, in which we found that there was a huge variety of answers that we received back from our research team. So those were more than 80 teams, I think.
And that's not an understatement, is it? It's really quite dramatic how different answers came through from my recollection.
Yes. So very much sort of stunning variance in the results we received. More variance that we, as the sort of PIs on this project, thought we would observe. And of course, like you said, is at first a bit frightening to think that
how dependent a result can be on the choices made, I suppose.
Right. You keep the hypothesis constant, you keep the data set constant, and all that changes is the way that researchers look at this and attempt to produce an answer. Right, and then it varies quite a bit, and usually that's of course a process that we do not get to observe. Right, so the beauty of this kind of study design is that you make observable the variety of ways you can go as a researcher, and not only the ways you can go, but the ways that people actually go. Right? Because the results we were sent back by our research teams were the results that they thought were the best possible answer they could come up with to the research question, to the test of that hypothesis. So it gives us a rare glimpse into a usually unobservable sort of universe of researcher decisions and the impact those decisions have on the outcomes we will get. Right. Now, the pessimistic way of looking at this, of course, is to say, oh my God, obviously social science work is very unreliable. If you cannot be sure whether the next best researcher whom you would give the same hypothesis and the same data set to wouldn't come up with a completely different answer to the question of whether that hypothesis is supported or not. However, I prefer to take a more optimistic sort of view on this, in that I think what really the study has done, like others like it, is to highlight an important problem, simply that we cannot afford to ignore, really. And that's, like I said earlier, with regards to that distinction between diagnostic and sort of diagnosis and treatment. That's a necessary step for us to become better, right? Yeah. And it does not in itself imply that social science as such is doomed to be unreliable and lacking credibility. Far from it. I think what it does make is a renewed case for transparency, also humility, and also, of course, for the sort of training in and application of techniques that serve to minimize the variance that we observed, or at least to make it visible on a more frequent basis. So as an individual researcher, for example, you have, I think, in the year 2026, where we are right now, a much, much stronger sort of rationale and indeed, or perhaps obligation to test the stability of your findings and to be transparent about it. But you can run, of course, a variety of research pipelines on the same data set yourself, right? You don't need 80 researchers for this. You can test yourself for, well, what would my research results have looked like had I run the analysis slightly differently, had I sliced the data perhaps a little bit differently in a way that would still be plausible. And that's something that wasn't definitely a standard procedure 10 years ago. Right? Absolutely not. Today, I think, as a result of studies like ours, I think it's more incumbent on researchers to take that extra step in order to increase the sort of trust we can put into the results. So I all see it in a sort of perspective of research improvement towards greater credibility and robustness, which I continue to think, even though the results initially were quite depressing, are absolutely within reach for our discipline.
Yeah, and you mentioned pre-registration, which I've talked about on this podcast before with other colleagues. That's one way perhaps of mitigating or making transparent these types of decisions. Can you, for those that aren't aware, perhaps give us a quick summary of, would that help in this sort of scenario, the act of pre-registration?
Yes, so pre-registration is absolutely a measure that's also in the toolkit of researchers today, which it wasn't, at least as a default, just 10 years ago, let's say, wherein you sort of start in the planning stages of a research project to already become public and open about it, in the sense that you devise your plan, you think very clearly about what it is that you want to do, and you think it through till the end, right? Which in itself is good practice, I would say, not just to plunge into a project willy-nilly and then just see how it goes, but to actually sort of think ahead. Be clear about what the objectives of your research are and how you plan on achieving those objectives. And in the case of empirical research, oftentimes that means thinking clearly about the design, the measurements that you are going to take, and most importantly, perhaps the analysis strategy that you want to apply in the end to get to those objectives. It wasn't, I'm afraid to say, common practice always for social researchers to think about all these things, as obvious as they might seem, as important to think ahead of, to do this, right? To look ahead to what am I actually going to do in detail later on. Oftentimes that was left for later in the conduct of research, and that's something that pre-registration wants to sort of do away with, in the sense that pre-registration means a pre-registered, publicly listed record of your plans from where you are right now in the planning stages of your project, all the way until the final execution of the data analysis and the conclusions you draw from the analysis as well. So to have a clear sort of plan for the future that's publicly accessible, unalterable as well, right? So it cannot be tampered with later on, such that everyone who has access to it can see what it was that you planned on doing initially before you did it, which ties your hands to some extent, or at least makes you accountable. Obviously, you can still, if you find out that your research plan had fundamental flaws, or you would like to do something in addition to what you sort of put down in the pre-registered plan, you can still extend and you can still be flexible. So in the sense that sort of metaphor of the tied hand isn't really true, is more that there's a clearer continuity in the observability of your own work as a researcher, right? Where the public knows where you started and where you and can compare that with where you ended up. And if there's a big inconsistency between these two things, then that raises questions, right?
Yeah, and I've spoken to, as I say, other colleagues who will come on to UKRN in a moment around this. I mean, is it practiced as much as it should be, do you think? Yeah, I mean, it's increasingly used, but not perhaps to the extent that it should be in the social sciences, would you say? Or?
Ideally, you would have pre-registration in the vast majority of any research that is not exploratory in nature or claims to be not exploratory. If there is a confirmatory element to your research, I think it should be thought of right now as obligatory to think of pre-registering your plan. That doesn't take away any of the value of exploratory research, just to be clear about this as well. But I think we are also, in practice, we have made some big improvements. Pre-registration today is an established term, which it wasn't 10 years ago. It is today. Everyone, I think any social scientist today knows what pre-registration is, that it's something that they should be doing if they want to sort of conform to best practice. And that sort of shift of norms is in itself a great success, I think. Does it mean that it's as much of a norm as it should be in practice? I don't think so. It certainly has improved. It has most improved hearteningly, I think, in the top journals in our fields. So that if there is perhaps a doubt sometimes about the sort of scientific value of journals, and especially for-profit journals as such, I think there is a case to be made for journals have improving some value in especially the sort of most visible elite journals, in that they were sort of instrumental in bringing about that norm shift just by requiring or sort of rewarding those good open research practices. That's, I think, in many top journals in my field anyways, it is perhaps not quite yet strictly required, but certainly beneficial to engage in pre-registration, to be able to say, hey, my study was pre-registered, here's the record, and we followed up on through on the plan that we pre-registered. But yeah, we're not at 100%, obviously.
Because it's a research culture issue, isn't it? I mean, you're talking there, it makes me think of, the incentives around research, and this is the Research Culture Uncovered podcast, and it's about the broader research culture, and this is part of that, isn't it? What incentivizes people, the things like the publish or perish culture, and how important it is to, people potentially salami slicing data to do lots of publications, and the tendency to look for positive results. All these kinds of things maybe feed into that. So we are sort of shifting that dial perhaps a little bit. But
yes, I think the publication system, especially at the top, I think is a space where you can observe a lot of tension between different incentives. And the publish or perish sort of culture, I'm afraid, is still very alive and around. However, what it takes to publish, especially in the top journals, that has somewhat shifted, I think, and that's the heartening part. Right? There's still certainly a perception that if your results are boring, quote unquote, you will find it harder to publish your work in a top journal. However, and that's the traditional, sort of quite deplorable state of affairs that we've had for decades now, I think. However, I think in addition to that sort of push for novelty, if you will, that has been quite deleterious in over time, we now have that additional sort of rekindled interest in rigor, I think, and that's partly sort of achievement of the open science movement, I think, where this it's not all about novelty, but the bar for claiming that you have something interesting and sufficiently credible to say from a rigor perspective is higher now. So in the sense that pre-registration is sort of a big sort of advantage if you want to make a strong case for novelty and interestingness. And then of course there are other open science practices that are today mandatory in many cases for the top journals, like publishing your data if they are publishable in principle, definitely publishing your analytical code, right? Because that's usually not privacy sensitive at all. It should be out there whether your data can be published or not. And also a drive towards sort of novel forms that sort of codify the spirit of pre-registration in a new publication format, like registered reports, for example, which more and more top journals also allow, at least. I think there was news just 2 weeks ago or so that the Nature, the sort of leading journal, is now allowing registered reports across all disciplinary fields. So you see that movement at the top, those increasing standards of rigor and transparency, and that is very heartening, right? Just to perhaps to explain to viewers, registered reports are simply a specific research publication format in which you submit your research plan, so what you want to pre-register in a pre-registration to a journal. They assess it in peer review as we know it, and if the plan comes out as sound and acceptable to reviewers, you obtain what's called a sort of agreement in principle, or acceptance in principle, and you are allowed to just go forth and do your research and just report it faithfully in relation to your original plan, and regardless what the results are of you doing this. Carrying out your plan, you will be accepted. Your paper will be published in that journal, and that's just once you've done that, you've written up your study, you resubmit it to the journal, and they subject it to what's called stage 2 review, where the focus is not on the interestingness of your findings or anything like that, but is simply to check whether you actually followed through on your plan that you submitted for stage 1 review. And if you did that, then your paper will be published regardless of the results. And that opens the door to publications of null results much more, right? Which 10, 15 years ago, many senior colleagues, for example, would have said that's the death of your wish to publish is if you don't have a positive finding. If your hypothesis test fails flat, then you are best off shelving that study and starting anew. Or
which is not how research should work, of course, is it? I mean, essentially, and that's where we're getting to. So that's fascinating. I'm just slightly conscious of time because I know you're a very busy man and you've got elsewhere to be relatively soon. But it is a fascinating paper, this, and I will link it. I don't know if there's a digestible talk that you've done, because I've seen you talk about it. Maybe we can talk about that another time if there is one around that I can link to. But I just, bearing in mind your time, and you've got lots going on. You're involved with the Social Research Methods Centre. I think this covers some of what we've already been talking about. So perhaps we haven't got time now to go into any more details about that. But colleagues can look that up, can't they, and become involved with the Social Research Methods Centre.
I would love so I'm a co-director together with my colleague Jose Pina Sanchez of the Social Research Methods Centre. I would love for any social researcher and those adjacent to social research to be aware of us at the University of Leeds, so where we sort of offer training resources, events, and general support from a methods perspective to researchers doing social research in a broad sense. And that includes, of course, sort of support with implementing open research practices as well.
Yeah, no, and again, I'll post links to that. But I suppose to come back round to UKRN, the UK Reproducibility Network, and your role as local network lead. So I have, on the podcast before, I've actually spoken with our colleague, Professor Darrell O'Connor. So he's the institutional lead, isn't he, for the UKRN, and I think I spoke with him actually about pre-registration, and again I'll link these posts in the show notes if people want to follow up. And I've also spoken to Marcus Manafo, who I'm sure you know as one of the co-founders of UKRN. But yeah, perhaps tell us a little bit before we finish around that role as local network lead. You've been doing it for quite a long time, and I think it might be time for you to step down. So we're also potentially trying to encourage colleagues, aren't we, to become more involved with this work, and potentially, if anybody was interested in taking on that role, then I'll give you an opportunity perhaps to pitch that before we finish.
Yes, so the role of local network lead is sort of deeply embedded in the organizational structure of UKRN, in that essentially within UKRN there are three broad groups of members, the first being the institutional leads that you already mentioned.
Sorry, perhaps we could just very quickly define UKRN. I mean,
so UKRN is the UK Reproducibility Network, so consortium, peer-led consortium of researchers essentially across the UK, who work together to ensure that the UK retains its place at the top of science production, scientific production of high quality research. So we're broadly interested in research quality, including most notably research transparency and rigor. That's broadly it, and that UKRN does that by supporting communities around those issues locally, but also nationally, producing training materials, resources, training opportunities, and generally supporting the dissemination of good practices in research. So that's the general mission statement. UKRN is made up of those three main groups, which is the institutional leads, institutional members, wherein institutions are usually universities, and there's usually one lead per university who has joined UKRN. There is the stakeholders group of external research organizations, funders, publishers, and so on. And then there's the local network leads, who are the representatives of the local grassroots networks of academics interested in matters of open research, research transparency, and research rigor, usually which are present in on many campuses across the UK, more than the institutional members, in fact. Right? So not every university that is not an institutional member does therefore not have a local network. Conversely, I mean, most campuses today, I think, in the UK have a local UKRN network, and that's what I'm the local network lead for at Leeds. The main purpose of this role is to organize local community across faculties, across schools, around those core issues of open research, research transparency, and research rigor. It's an informal role in that you get to reach out and identify interest in those things and to sort of crystallize it into activity on campus by reaching out to people who are interested in these themes, reaching out to the institution itself, work together with people like you, yourself, who have been incredibly helpful over the years in promoting open research and more credible research at Leeds. And just to think quite openly about the many different ways in which you can support this kind of discourse, these discussions on campus. So the most obvious activity in that regard is for us to maintain a Teams space where we have more than 200 members from around campus who get to learn and discuss about open research developments, new tools, resources, publications, events that are happening.
Community building we're interested in,
Yes.
aren't we? We're trying to build a community. And again, I'll post a link to that team if colleagues do want to join.
Yes, absolutely. And it's been a pleasure to find that through that role of that I've fulfilled for, I think, almost 7 years now, that really there is interest and relevance of those bigger themes within UKRN in every faculty across our campus. Right, so you get to meet very different people from very different academic traditions and orientations, but they all can relate and connect to the core themes of UKRN. Also, what I've been glad to see is that we do have a fairly active regional network of local network leads in the Yorkshire and Humber region.
Which again, I stood in for you recently, didn't I? Because again, you were too busy, so I actually attended on your behalf. To that meeting recently.
So there were two. So that was the second meeting that we had. But yeah, thank you again for.
I'll collect you awards.
Well, yeah. I'm glad to have you, let's say. So that's a really nice development because in Leeds alone, we now have I believe, 4 local networks, right? So it's not only University of Leeds as sort of the research powerhouse in Leeds, but also Leeds Beckett University has a local network. Leeds Trinity University has a local network, and even Leeds Arts University has its own local network, right? So with Leeds as a city already gets to showcase the breadth of the discussions.
And we can all learn from each other. I certainly did when I went to that event at Leeds Beckett. I used to work at Leeds Beckett, and obviously there's different context, and we're all learning from each other.
Yes, it's fascinating to learn how arts people and also sort of colleagues from more sort of application applied sort of perspectives at Leeds Beckett, for example, get to look at open research, and certainly is a very fulfilling part of the work to sort of strike those connections, be in conversations with these people. So it's a very fulfilling and rewarding sort of role that I hope we will sort of be able to find a good successor for.
So if colleagues are interested, they can get in touch with you. We'll do more sort of promotion around this and conversations. And again, it really is just about this building community, isn't it? And but as I say, you've done 7 years. It's probably, and you got lots of other things going on. So perhaps it's time.
We need some fresh blood, I think. Yes.
So again, I think we've kept you slightly longer than you wanted because I think you've got elsewhere to be very soon. But thank you, Eike, for your time. That was great. It's always nice to speak to you. It's everybody's busy. It's not always we have spoken a lot, and as I say, liaised over the years, but it's difficult sometimes to find the time just for a conversation like this. So that's been great. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Nick. It was brilliant.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast. Please subscribe so you never miss out on our brand new episodes. And if you're enjoying the discussions, give us some love by dropping a 5-star rating and written review, as it helps other research culturists find us. And please share with a friend and show them how to subscribe. Thanks for listening, and here's to you and your research culture.